Everyone to the CG webinar, which is our seminar number 219. I think, Trevor, we're up to 86. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, our 86th webinar format meeting of this kind, and we've been in continuous webinars since April last year. We established a webinar program quite early when the pandemic first affected the world as a whole, and it's been a great pleasure to us to open up conversation on different issues in higher education and primarily higher education research. And we've also, as well as higher education, we've discussed science quite a lot as well. And we're very interested in cross-cultural issues. And of course, many different national situations have come past us. Now, today we're going to be talking about what happens when international faculty go to Japan to work. Japan, a society which is, I think, often seen as a very closed society by outsiders, and yet there's more foreign engagement in Japan. Inside Japan, there's a higher level of doctoral movement into Japan than into many other countries, for example. And there are foreign faculty in Japan. There are also patterns of migration into Japan, although that's not always fully acknowledged by Japanese government because it's a little bit difficult to talk about domestically. There are people who go to Japan and make it their lives in Japan and become Japanese people. Today, we've got to talk about those issues with us, Lilan Chen and Futao Huang. Before I introduce them properly, let me take you through the webinar protocols. Now, the webinar is being recorded. We always do this, and we post the webinar on the CG website, and that takes you to the YouTube channel, which we use. And we find that the webinar is being viewed on YouTube now more than it is as a live broadcast. A transcript of the chat function in today's webinar will also be posted. So what you say in the chat and what you might say in the Q&A part of the webinar will be recorded for all time, or at least as long as YouTube lasts. Now, please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or you're at the stage of asking a question during the Q&A. And you don't have to have your video on either during the webinar, but again, we'd like you to turn it on when you are asking a question. We recommend using the speaker view setting in Zoom, which is in the top right-hand corner there, so you can more clearly see who is talking at any given time. To ask a question, and we do want you to ask questions, use the chat function. Type out your question. It's a good idea to do this sort of towards the end of the presentation stage of the webinar, which is usually after around about 25 minutes or so, because then you'll be guaranteed to be selected into the Q&A part of the webinar. So use the chat, come forward, make statements and ask questions, and then if they seem to relate to the topic of the presentation, we'll select you into the Q&A part of the discussion. When we get to that part of the webinar, when you're invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video, and then state your name and where you were from, and then ask your question or make your statement. Now, I'll introduce our speakers. We have Lilan Chen with us. She's a PhD candidate at the Research Institute for Higher Education at Hiroshima University. It's one of the leading centers for researching higher education in the world. Perhaps it's the largest of all the research centers that focuses on higher education and comparative and international aspects of higher education. Lilan's work is about the international mobility of faculty and international students. And the main theme of her doctoral dissertation is the integration of international faculty in Japan. And with Lilan, and introducing her today, is a well-known, highly respected, and much engaged and active in our discussions researcher, Futao Huang, who's professor at the Research Institute for Higher Education at Hiroshima University. He came to Japan in 1999. Before that, he conducted research in several Chinese universities, and his interests are quite broad. They include internationalization in different aspects, the academic profession, and higher education in East Asia, its development, where it's going. He's done quite a lot of work, not only on Japan, but on China. He publishes widely. He's a very active scholar in English, Chinese, and Japanese languages, and Futao's capacity to work in those three academic conversations is one that we all respect very greatly. One day he might tell us about the differences between the three and how the discourse shifts between them, and how you have to be one kind of person in one place and another kind of person in another, but that's another topic for another time. Happy now at this point to hand over to Futao, and I think he will introduce Lilan. Futao, you have the floor.
Okay.
And Futao is now screen sharing. There we are.
Hey, thank you very much, Simon.
You can see
thank
that.
You for your introduction, Casey. Can you
Yes.
see my slide? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to make a very short introduction to the background. I have only 2 slides and I'll talk for about 5 minutes. It's a great pleasure for us to give a talk about international affective integration to Japan in a broad sense. And as most of you know that much more research has been carried out on international students. Little is knowing of international faculty or scholars, although the number of international faculty has been expanded in recent years in many countries and regions. Among limited research in international faculty, seems that more focus has been placed on the following aspects. For example, the rationale and the strategies in hosting countries for recruiting international faculty. International faculty's motivation to work in hosting institutions and countries. International faculty's academic activities in hosting institutions and countries. And challenges facing international faculty in hosting countries. The benefits and impacts of international faculty on higher education and research, and the hosting, the country, the society of the hosting country. So I think there's not so much research on this aspect. And this data suggests that there has been a rapid increase in numbers of full-time international faculty, and from 1999 to last year. And these data only refers to the full-time number of international faculty working at Japan's 4-year universities, not including those part-time international faculty. And although there has been a rapid increase in numbers of these full-time international faculty at universities, it appears that no research has been carried out into international faculty's integration, or use another phrase, adjustment to hosting institutions and or countries, showing on findings from semi-structured interviews with a large number of full-time international faculty hired at Japan's university. So, and Lilan will focus on this topic, and I think she will talk for about 20 minutes. And this is part of her doctor dissertation. So this is my brief introduction to the background of our core presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Futao and Lilan. I think now you are free to speak.
Okay, thanks a lot for Simon, the introduction, and also the introduction of the background of Professor Futao Huang. As you already know, this is the title of this presentation. And this is the outline of this presentation. And the background, Professor Futao Huang already introduced about the changes in number of them in Japanese universities. Despite the rapid expansion of international faculty at the Japanese universities, many found they are excluded from the academic mainstream, and some even perceived themselves as the tokenized symbol of internationalization of Japanese universities. So the scholars indicated that more attention needs to be paid to their integration specifically. However, issues raised here, for example, what is integration, and especially from their own perspectives, and do they think it is really necessary to integrate into Japan? So with this awareness, I reviewed some researches concerning integration. The term integration has been taken as a form of incorporation, which can be investigated from three main theoretical perspectives. So it appears that the integration is heavily conceptualized, and due to these criticisms, the three main theoretical frameworks can be hardly applicable to the case of international faculty in Japan. In addition, the psychological statement have been constructed as a significant factor impacting international faculty's retention. Therefore, there is a necessity to explore the term integration in the specific context of Japan, and especially from the subject perspectives of international faculty themselves. Regarding the previous studies on the integration of international faculty, they have been captured from two main broad themes. As you can see here, the theoretical nature and the practical issues concerning the integration. When it comes to the integration of international faculty in Japan, the previous studies has engaged with mainly the challenges that the international faculty encounter at Japanese universities, as introduced by Professor Futao Huang. So in summary, the integration has been viewed as a person-environment fit of international faculty from an organizational perspective. In addition, in terms of the inquiries concerning what is integration, or if they are integrated and whether the integration is necessary for them, their own perspectives on integration should be the central. So it is necessary to investigate their own perspectives and attitudes towards their integration from an individual perspective. Based on the previous studies, this study employs this ABC model to explore international faculties' perceptions and attitudes towards their integration. Three research questions have been addressed in this study. First, about their cognition. How do international faculty observe their integration in Japan? First, concerning their effect. How do international faculty evaluate their integration in Japan? And third, in terms of their behavior, what practical orientations do international faculty hold towards their integration? Semi-structured interviews have been applied to answer the three research questions mentioned just now. And these are the basic informations of the semi-structured interviews. To ensure the sufficient evaluation of the participants, this study took their institution and individual attributes such as their nationality, affiliation, age, and positions into consideration. Okay, let's move on to the results section. First, integration. First, regarding the cognitive component of the integration has been illustrated as a process, even though some mention that it should be a one-way process, that international faculty should follow the culture and the tradition of Japan. But the majority emphasized that it should be a two-way process involving both international faculty and the host, Japan. In addition to process, many observed their integration as a state, and the three dimensions has been identified here. The first one is in the work aspect. It seems the perception of equality has been taken as integration, and many participants contended their failed integration by addressing the perceptual schisms of insiders and outsiders between international and Japanese faculty. For example, faculty 22 mentioned there are no foreigners making decisions at any level, and faculty 26 mentioned I'm excluded from the decision making, to reflect that they are not integrated. And in addition, the perception of being well supported and mentored has also been involved in the work integration. For example, faculty 12 mentioned, most of my colleagues are very friendly and open and helpful in a lot of ways. Secondly, in the social cultural aspects, similarly, the equality of the same rights and obligations have been conceptualized as integration. For example, faculty 20 mentioned, I am expected to do what other people do, and I expect that I will do what other people do, just being treated the same as Japanese people. In addition, the relatedness with Japan were noted as a significant component in social cultural aspects. For example, faculty 34 mentioned, my friends, my co-workers, the ones I talk to most, my wife, our neighbors are Japanese. I am surrounded, I am embedded in the Japanese culture to show that he is very integrated. Finally, in the context of psychological aspects, they used the positive expressions such as belonging, sense of belonging, home, and enjoying this kind of expressions to reflect the highest level of their subjective feelings. So the attachment towards Japan has been taken as integration. To sum up, international faculty observed their integration as a long-standing two-way process of acquiring equality, developing engagement, and forming a sense of attachment towards integration, as you can see from this figure. Secondly, regarding the affective component of integration, the participants showed a positive attitude by addressing its contributions in mainly these three aspects. First, the professional development. For example, faculty 4 mentioned through integration, he get to know more about the professional knowledges and skills. And the second aspect is character building. For example, some participants mentioned by integrating, their character became more relaxed, more open-minded, or understanding of people. And finally, some people mentioned by integrating into Japanese culture, for example, kuki or yomu means reading the atmosphere and read the people. This kind of experience has enriched their intercultural competency. So in terms of their affective component, they consider the integration as a variable benefit in Japan. When it comes to the behavior component, three types of orientation have been identified. The first one is preventive orientation, which can be caused by both intrinsic and extrinsic factor. The intrinsic factor means when international faculty favor separation strategies. For example, faculty 14 mentioned, I like to be alone, to be by myself. I like to be isolated. And faculty 16 mentioned, I just want to be happy myself. I'm completely detached. Where I'm today is my home. When they have this kind of separation intentions, they tend to resist the integration. The intrinsic factors refer to the segregation intentions applied by Japan, which is more easy to happen to the teaching faculty at Japanese universities, especially the language teachers, because they have to teach many more classes, and it's more easy for them to feel like an outsider, and they were just informed about what is going to happen. And this assumption can be verified by most of the participants who occupy the position out of the language teaching. For example, faculty 31 mentioned, I'm a chemist. I'm not a language teacher, to show that he is different from the language teachers. In contrast, when both Japan and the international faculty share the same integration intentions, international faculty were more likely to endorse promotional orientation. So for example, faculty 19, he mentioned they try their best and they are very kind, they want to help me. So I want, and I'm trying to be a part of this society. Despite the criticisms of assimilation in the prevailing discourses, the analysis suggests that when the intentions of international faculty in Japan reach the consensual of assimilation, positive responses can also be predicted. This both assimilation interactive relation is very easy to happen with those who have less cultural difference with Japan. For example, faculty 1, he graduated from one of the Japanese universities, and he said that experience made his life easier. So he said, I always try to initiate relationships or cooperations to have a more active role. And when the intentions of Japan and the international faculty experience partial agreement and partial disagreement, international faculty's orientation tend to be occasional, mainly determined by international faculty themselves. Some emphasize their insistence on integration. For example, faculty 30 mentioned, even though if you wait for them to come to you, I think it will be never. So I will go to do those things with the idea of developing relationships with people. Most of the rest felt discouraged by the contradictory intention with their host. So like faculty 13, he mentioned, they treat us like you have to do this Japanese way or nothing. So my attitude is kind of apathy. I'm not going to go out of my way or trying to fight too hard with anything. To sum it up, by analyzing the practical attitude of international faculty at Japanese universities, 3 types of orientation has been identified as analyzed just now, and the influencing factors of their practical orientations can be summarized as: first, Japan's intention from a macro perspective, and the job position of international faculty from a meso perspective, and personal intention, origin, and previous experience in Japan from macro perspective. Regarding their practical intentions, it appears that when the interactive relation between the host, Japan, and the international faculty became conflictual, for example, Japan favor segregation and the international faculty favor a separation strategy, then the international faculty were more likely to prevent integration. And in contrast, when the consensual interactive relations achieved by both Japan and the international faculty displaying as, for example, Japan favored the integration and the international faculty also favored the integration, or both assimilation. The international faculty tend to promote their integration. And finally, when the intention towards Japan and the international faculty experience partial agreements and partial disagreements, the practical orientation of international faculty tend to be occasional. For example, international faculty want integration, but Japan favor assimilation, then their practical orientations will be occasional, worried by the international faculty themselves. Okay, let's move on to the last section. The main research question is, how do international faculty at Japanese universities view their integration? The data analysis indicates that international faculty perceive their integration as a beneficial, long-standing two-way process of acquiring equality, developing engagement, and forming a feeling of attachment towards Japan. Despite these positive perceptions on their integration, 3 types of practical orientations of international faculty has been identified, namely preventive, occasional, and promotional. Based on these 2 main research findings, the following points need to be further discussed. First, this study points out that the integration of international faculty in Japan can be considered both as a process and as a state, which is in contrast with the prevalent discourses concerning integration. And the second, regarding their attitude, despite the positive perceptions, diverse attitudes have been identified in this study, which can be attributed to the complex nature of international faculty in Japan. And the analysis emphasized that the difference between research and teaching faculty in Japan, especially in the case of language teachers. Two reasons can explain this phenomenon. First, those teaching faculty tend to have a huge cultural difference with Japan because most of them are from English-speaking countries such as the US or the UK, and most of them were not graduated from the Japanese universities. And the second reason can be spurred by the neoliberal globalization. Higher education institutions emphasized more on research or research faculty, so the tension caused by professional and social cultural factors resulting in their peripheral rule. In order to get used to the host environment and to protect themselves, they tend to create their own private space and prevent integration. And there is regarding the research faculty, the analysis indicates that the research faculty who are from similar cultural backgrounds or had a previous experience in Japan tend to promote their integration. So also two reasons can be applied here. This is because one, such kind of background, for example, their origins, whether they are from China or Korean, this kind of origins or their experience in Japan help them to inform their knowledges in Japan. And two, due to the Nihon Jinron ideology, the Japanese people theory, many Japanese universities are more likely to hire those who are familiar with Japanese culture and Japanese management. Therefore, those who have a better Japanese knowledge were more willing to integrate into Japan. And they were also the category that Japan would like to integrate. And the third is this study indicates the gap between their perceptions and their practical attitudes towards integration. Because despite the positive perceptions, but some showed their reluctance to integrate into Japan. This can be attributed to the fact that their attitude towards integration were influenced by both their own intentions and Japan's intention. Therefore, the personal perception of international faculty should be recognized as a critical factor for their integration. More importantly, this study also underscores the great influence of the host Japan on their integration, which contributed to not only the practical attitude, but also the actual perceptions of integration of international faculty members. As for the implication of this study, despite the value of strategies to attract the international faculty, the policy improve their integration are also equally necessary, especially for the language teachers and those who are not familiar with Japan. So the coordination of a comprehensive policy covering both the recruitment and the integration of international faculty is greatly needed. And second, since this study is associated with the integration of international faculty, so it can contribute to the further studies in this regard. And third, given the perceptual variations of integration and the attitudes towards integration, more proactive initiatives are expected to be undertaken by Japan, and also more tailored support systems and more applicable theory concerning integration can be expected to be developed. Regarding the limitation of this study, first, this study investigated the intention of Japan from international faculty's narratives. We trust that what the international faculty said is right, but the further studies are needed to explore the Japan's specific perceptions and the intentions directly, not through the international faculty's perspectives. And secondly, given the perceptual constraints towards integration, their intention, further investigation into the mechanism of how do different attitudes lead to diverse integration are necessary. Finally, it is unclear how much this study can generalize to other international faculty from different institutions, because this study only adjusts the Japanese university, four-year universities, not junior universities. And also, we don't know how much this study can generalize to the context of other countries, for example, China or Korean. And this is all. Thank you so much for your attention.
And thank you, Lilan. Thank you for explaining the research so well to us. I have some questions for you, and we'll wait for some more questions to come in the Q&A in the chat. My question, I got three. My question firstly is, I should say that I agree with your point about integration being a process and a state. I think it's a nice point. Being a state in the sense that we can observe it and, you know, we can research it. If it wasn't a state, if it was continually in motion, we wouldn't be able to see it at all. Because we can understand it as a state, we are able to research it. But of course, it's continually changing. And yeah, it's a process as well, like everything, in fact. My first question is, in your experience in the among the people you talk to about the foreign faculty, did their identity and values change as a result of being in Japan? I'm not asking whether they were able to behave correctly according to Japanese requirements, but I'm asking you, did they become different people, do you think, as a result of their experience in Japan?
I think in some sense, yes, they changed. As I mentioned in the presentation, because their practical orientation is what they're actually doing in the real life. It's some of them are different from their original intentions. So in the beginning, maybe some of them think, okay, I should try my best to integrate into Japan. But the host environment, the Japanese university or the society seems like not that friendly to them. Some of them will tend to change to, okay, then fine, this society is not welcoming me, so I'm gonna be a little bit apathy with the situation. I'm gonna prevent my integration. This kind of case happened in my interview. So I think some of them changed, but also it depends on first how strong their intentions, original intentions are, and the second, what kind of environment they are in, both in Japanese universities and also their host society.
Did they become more Japanese than before?
I think according to my research findings, because Japanese people prefer the people who have a better Japanese knowledge. So of course, some of them, they want to integrate into this society, or should I just say adapt to this society. They will change to behave like a Japanese and also learn more Japanese culture and also learn Japanese language. But some of them also have a very strong opinion, like this should be a two-way process. It's not like I adapt to Japan like one way. They also need to adapt to me. So in the case of those international faculty, they tend to be, how can I say, perceive themselves as a token at the Japanese universities. Will have this kind of negative outcome for this kind of faculty members.
Yes, and we get this both all those dynamics are also happening for international students as well. I mean, I haven't researched international faculty, I've only researched international students, but you know, PhD students and people who stay for a few years, they undergo these different reactions as well. I think one of the questions is you know, to understand what happens to people, you know, when they move across the border and they go to another country for a few years. One way to understand what happened is what happens when they go back home again. You know, are they still the same as they were once before, or have they changed? When do their parents and their friends and their family members and their, you know, and others in their country of birth say you are different, you know, or do they say, oh, it's good to have you back, you're just the same as before?
Yeah. That's a very good point, I think. Thank you
Well,
so much.
it's I talking to people from Japan who go to abroad for a few years and then go back to Japan. Sometimes it's hard to go back to Japan because people can tell if you've been influenced by foreign, culture and you've changed, and then it becomes you're not so accepted anymore as Japanese. So this is kind of a crisis for some people. Other people go back and no problem. They go back to being accepted and, no problems. They perhaps they behave differently. That's my first question. My second question is about this is a simple point, really. But if you had a colleague who was coming to Japan for the first time and was going to stay for a few years and work, what advice would you give that person about how to handle the situation? What would be your best advice?
I think it's really depends on their own like desire. If they want to stay in Japan like long term permanently, my suggestion will be it's better to learn more about the Japanese culture, because in the end Japan is still quite homogeneous culture.
Yes.
And yeah, if you don't learn about it, it's quite difficult for you to like get integrated into this culture and integrated to communicate with the people. And yeah, I think to make the like a comprehensive internationalization is still far in the case of Japan.
But a very interesting culture, no? I mean, it's like to learn about Japan is very good, because it's complex, developed, different to China and different to Korea, different to the West. It's very intriguing, I think, beautiful in some ways, a long tradition, and again, different to everyone else. The problem that I think all mobile, this is my third question, and I'll go to Aki Yanazawa after this. My third question is, everywhere we find the same problem with mobile students and faculty. They go to a new country and people are not very interested in them, People don't want to change because they have this new person, They expect a new person to change to become like them. Local people are mostly not interested in transforming themselves, and they expect the mobile person, the visitor, the new entrant, the new worker, the new faculty to change instead. Well, how can we overcome this problem? Is it possible to make some progress on this difficult issue? Because there should be some two-way learning from internationalization. Otherwise, it's just one country's interests, that are being pursued. Countries getting talent from somewhere else, using it for themselves, instead of learning and changing, together. How can we make progress on this issue? How can Japan and China integrate more effectively with each other? Because we need that international understanding between these two great countries.
Yeah, I think it's a very critical issue in a lot of non-English speaking countries, like in East Asian region, like Japan, China, and also Korean. I think the biggest problem is because we are not the immigration countries. So we don't have a very long distance of attracting immigrants, like how to get along with different people. This is something from history and also something from culture. And this, I think, currently it will be last for quite a long time. But if you really want to change this kind of situation, I think like the US or Canada, maybe make this culture, make this society more diversified. This kind of strategies will be more helpful in some sense. But still, I think it takes time, because after thousands and hundreds of years in, for example, China and Japan, we have our Confucian traditions and the culture. If you say, okay, let's change it, it's not like we can change it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. It really takes time. And with the development of globalization, I think in the end, if the globalization increased quite a lot, then maybe as the Terry Kim, he proposed how to say that one, the transnational identity capital, and every international faculty can become like that, then it will not be local society based. It will be based on this all over the world. It will be transnational. It's not national based. I think if we try our best to go for it, maybe in the future it can be it can come true. But still now maybe a little bit difficult to address this issue.
Yeah, Terry Kim will be appearing on the webinar next at the next webinar, actually next Tuesday next week. So you can see her there. I think this idea of transnational kind of academic capital and this notion of a shared space, which we are all part of, and we're all learning from each other. I do think internationalized faculty understand this. Many understand this. Of course, if they can do it better if they have more than one language, and they have several languages, it helps a lot. Like some of our European colleagues can do that, for example, speak in many languages. But this idea, I think, is understood with internationalized faculty. But most faculty are not internationalized. In Japan or UK, it's the same. I mean, most people are not working internationally. They don't travel themselves. They just, want to be the same as, normal as they were when they grew up as children, and they don't want to change. So it's more difficult to achieve some kind of understanding of this ability to learn and change through the encounter with each other. I would like to bring in Aki Yanazawa from Tohoku at this point. Aki, are you there, please?
Okay, thank you very much. I really enjoyed today's presentation, partly because of I'm a kind of the opposite side, means that I am the kind of the so-called Japanese who are the facing with the international faculty daily, and especially the your generation now talking about the so-called integration and assimilation matters are really, really interesting for me. And my question is partly based on my own research with the Ugota about 10 years ago on the international faculty in Japan. And it was much more macro level discussion. And what we found is basically there are three types of the different category of the international faculties in Japan. One is that the so-called the faculties of natural sciences or the engineering. So those people are coming to Japan and doing research for the higher as a kind of early career researchers. And they are quite research active, but do not teach in many cases, and do not really use Japanese in their own working life. Although, of course, they may use some Japanese in a hometown or the private chatting. The other one is the social science researchers. In many cases, they are so-called Japanese study researcher, so that they are really, really keen about to know how the Japanese social science and humanity research are there. And they're quite familiar with the Japanese literature. And those people are kind of some objective view to the Japanese, the academics as a kind of the target of the study, right? Just like for example, the Japanese also do the African study or something like that. So that is kind of the attitude. The third category is a language teacher. And this is really, really, to be honest, problematic because there are two different meanings. One is that they are, as you already mentioned, that recognized as a teaching staff. So the people who are not research active. And we have a very strong culture that the faculty should be research active. and they are outside of that category. So they are really faced with the sometimes the target of segregation, but this is not because they are non-Japanese, but much more they are the kind of different types of the academics, so-called. The other possibility, the problem is that having said so, those people are technically within the faculty members in Japan. You see that, so that they can be a professor or the associate professor or the lecturer. And we don't have some kind of a teaching staff, a language teaching staff, or some kind of the category outside the faculty. So technically they are within the faculty members, but they are treated the same. But many people believe that they are different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then many countries, for example, if you go to the United States and then if you become a Chinese language teacher or the Japanese language teacher, in many cases they are not treated as a faculty member, but outside of faculty member. So it's a different category. So then the situation is really different. So I think that this is not always the issue of the the national cultural issue, but much more within an organizational, in the issue of the organizational culture. So that is one point. And at the same time, the one more complex thing is that the language teacher inevitably have its own identity as a home language and home culture, right? But if you're an English teacher, means that you should be English. Or the English, you have to find out your identity as an English-speaking society and the English as a language. So that really gives the obstacle to get involved fully to the Japanese culture and language. So I think that I think it is very, very important to treat the language teacher issue not only within your research framework, but more kind of comparative or the wider perspective. That is my almost a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think you mainly made two comments. And the first one, you mentioned the engineering faculty or the social science, for example, the Japanese study faculty. And if we look at this issue from a more macro perspective, actually, I think you mentioned two broad categories. The first one is also about research faculties. They mainly engaged with for example, engineering. You said there are no teaching, just mainly conducting research, and also some faculties in social science fields. So the point I made in my presentation, I mentioned that their job position is kind of a very influential factor that will influence their integration. And also, I should have mentioned my definition of international faculty before this study, because all of the full-time employees at Japanese universities have been considered international faculty in my study. So when you mentioned the language teachers, maybe they're outside of the faculty group, I think maybe in some other people's study, or maybe we go to the United States, maybe this kind of case exists. But in my study, I feel they are included in the faculty, this category. They are included as my research target. So the first point is absolutely, I agree with you. You mentioned that the job position is kind of a very important factor influencing the integration. And you said it's like an organizational thing. It's not just language or something. Yes, I also think so, because a lot of language teachers really, they feel like they're outsiders. They are different from the research faculty. Normally, they tend to have more teaching workload, and they are more engaged with a lot of teaching and not engaged in any kind of, let's say, the organizational activities. So really, they have this kind of feeling of being an outsider. And you mentioned the teaching faculty, they will have their own identity, and it's difficult for them to get involved into Japanese universities. I also think it's very true. So the keyword in my study is called integration. So it's not like adaptation or adjustment. I think Japanese university, even though you hired them just to improve the diversity of Japanese universities, but also you need to also respect their culture. So it should be those kind of language teachers, they need to try to learn Japanese culture, of course, adapt to Japanese culture, but also Japan side should also adapt to their culture to learn what those faculty, for example, those American and British faculties need, and how can we provide a better, favorable environment for them. So I think this should be called integration, or it will be just, as you mentioned, involvement or adaptation or adjustment for the language teachers to get involved into Japanese university. Did that make sense? I'm sorry.
I thought that was a really good reply, actually. I want to thank both of you. I mean, I think that's a really good conversation. And I particularly, it's particularly important to underline Aki's point that, it's not national characteristics or culture or language which decide what happens. If we take that view, then everyone is different in different parts of the world, and we'll never learn from each other. And we'll always have these big barriers. Of course, we can make a difference. What we do in institutions makes a difference. And, our disciplines affect things. Our organizational environment affects things. Management of the workplace affects things a lot. We can establish an environment where the principle on which we're working is that we learn from the other. We don't suppress differences. We acknowledge they exist, and we learn from each other, and we are willing to change because of this. And that willingness to change is very important. That openness, I think, to other people and their ideas and thoughts. And now I understand, I think, a little bit better, Lilan, why you're using integration. I think this is a good word because, as you say, adaptation implies a asymmetrical or dominant relationship. You adopt another culture, one culture is lost, they become identical to the other culture. Whereas the integration idea leaves room for diversity. It's the kind of Chinese principle, unity in diversity. This is a very good principle, in my opinion, for all human relations and certainly intercultural relations. So, what international faculty bring to universities in nations is this fantastic opportunity, to learn from the other and learn from each other and have a process of mutual development, which doesn't suppress differences, but benefits from them, gains from new insights, new ideas that others might have. So this is what we try to, I think we're all committed to encouraging this. And these principles are not marginal or they're central, to the way we relate to each other, I think. Even within one country, it's also true. There are diversities and differences between different kinds of people and people from different regions also. I think you've helped us think that through, and Aki also. And Aki, I want to compliment you on the excellent background illustration. You've got Kiki's Delivery Service by the great Hayao Miyazaki, the great director, and I think it's finest film in some respects. So I'm always very fond of Porco Rosso as well, because it's such a funny film and such a clever film. But what a great filmmaker he is, and we appreciate that you are appearing with different backgrounds from his films each time you come into the webinar. So I hope you continue to do that. We've got a further question from let me see, Wun Chin Yong. Please come in.
Oops. Hello.
There she is.
Thank you, Prof. Simon. Hi, Lilan.
Hello.
And hi, Prof. Futao and everyone. Okay. Thank you for having me. It's my first time asking question in this seminar. All right, so I'm looking forward to my question. Okay. Thank you, Prof. All right. Okay, just a brief introduction of where I'm coming from so you understand the direction of my question. I'm currently a faculty professional support service staff specializing in the area of human resources, supporting our both local and international faculty in a transnational education environment. All right. So long story short, and I'm also conscious of time, my only question will be from the micro perspective, all right? international faculties, based on my observation over the years, say about 4 or 5 years in total, they are usually treated very differently when they arrive to countries like, example, Malaysia or any other countries within the Southeast Asia region. You know, sometimes they'll be treated, forgive my language, like a king. You know, in short, they'll be treated very differently. And at times, when they see, oh, they are treated differently, they will expect themselves to be treated in an entitled manner when they come to work, all right? So my question is, in your research for international faculties in Japan, which is the East Asia region, do you see this sort of behavior evident? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
You mean, do they feel they have been treated differently? Like from the Japanese universities or the social committees or Japanese society, something like that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So before I say the integration of international faculty, actually I have some different expectations, okay, different faculty, they will have different attitudes towards their integration. And this partly, this kind of attitude partly is influenced by the Japanese society. So yes, I can tell you, yes, the different international faculty, they have different experience. Some of them have been treated differently by Japanese universities, as just we mentioned with as Yonezawa professor, he just mentioned, for example, the job position will make the language teachers feel like they are not that privileged, something like that, because they just teach foreign languages. And for the research faculties, for example, the university will put more emphasis on the research and also research faculties. Of course, in the case of the language teachers, they will feel like I'm not the priority, and they just treat us like an outsider, and we are just here to make the internationalization of Japanese university visible, because they are from the US or the UK, some Western countries. They have very visible appearance of being a foreigner in a way. So of course, the different attributes will make them have different experience. So yeah, this also happened in Japan. Thank you so much for your question.
And thank you both. And
Simon, can I add one point? I think it's important, and the target group is only full-time international faculty. In terms of the situation in province, roughly we can divide international faculty into two broad groups.
We've lost the sound. The connection is sometimes happens in our webinars. We'll give Futao 5 seconds and then we'll perhaps pass to the next question. I'm very sorry. I'll ask Futao if he wants to come back at the end. Our next question is from, here we are. So Huang Chen, would you like to come in now?
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Thank for the presentation, very impressive. I have a question about the faculty's academic integration, because they come to Japan to teach, and I'm wondering whether they have problems with this instead of other than social integration, did they have problems with academic integration? What, for example, during their teaching, do they need to adapt to a Japanese, the teaching style of Japanese universities, some bureaucratic issues? Did they ever complain about this? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, sure. It's very interesting. And also this is the motivation for me to conduct this study, because in the beginning, from the previous studies, they mentioned that a lot of international faculties at the Japanese university, they perceived themselves as the symbol, token of Japanese universities. which means I can reply to you now. Yes, they have a lot of have different problems with academic integration in Japan. So, but as I mentioned just now, and also we discussed with Yonezawa, Professor Yonezawa, and it depends on their job position and their Japanese knowledges. For example, Chinese or Korean faculties, they are in Japanese universities just to, they are doing some research activities. And basically, we are sharing the same Confucian culture and the traditions. And a lot of them, they were educated in Japanese universities. So in the case of them, maybe they feel not that difficult. They are not struggling to integrate into Japanese university because they already have this kind of experience, which helped them to better integrate into Japanese university. But also, we mentioned that another group of faculty, for example, those who are from the US or the UK, and they from very far from some countries has very how can I say, distanced cultural background, and they were never educated in Japanese universities, or they don't have so many Japanese experience, then integrating into Japanese university will be very difficult for them. So yeah, it also depends on their different attributes. Thank you so much.
Now, I'm conscious of time, Lilan, and we probably should shut down pretty soon. We usually close by about 5 past because people leave at that point. I do have one question in the chat, which Bernard Lee has asked me to ask you, which is that about foreigners working in Japan. I'm not sure why Bernard is asking this question, but he's asking, can foreigners who cannot speak Japanese get a faculty job, a professorial job in Japan? Is it possible to work as in Japanese professor position without a good knowledge of Japanese language?
I think yes, but the possibility maybe will not be that much. I think this question we can ask my supervisor, Professor Huang, to tell us, because I'm just a PhD student. I don't know so much about this position, the job hunting mechanisms.
Yes. I don't know whether you've been able to get back in, Futao, but I'd be happy to, for you to come in and make a final comment, because we will have to close the webinar, I think, in the next minute or two. So would you like to say anything? Have we got you back? No, the connection's not working. Lilan, I'm afraid we can't bring in Futao again. It's a shame, isn't it? Because he was halfway through his comment when we lost him. Can you pass on our apologies to him that we won't be able to wait because we don't know when he's coming back, so we'll have to close the webinar.
Yeah, I'll come back. Simon, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it's possible, and many the international faculty members become full professors at Japanese university without knowing, Japanese language or culture, because most of them are engaged in research. They are expected to make good publications. So in Japan, at least 2 types of international faculty members. One type is more involved in research. The other is, as it was discussed by several, the participants, there are many involved in the provision of foreign language programs for local students. The answer is yes.
There you are. So Bernard, if you're still listening, there may be hope. Maybe a possibility, maybe some lines of employment there. I'm going to have to move to the close, colleagues. So thank you, Futao, and thank you, Lilan, I thought you handled the questions really well. I wish I'd been so confident and so capable as you when I was doing my PhD. No, you did really well today. Thank you very much indeed. And with good presentation, I think all of us were very pleased with the slides and learned a lot from you. So thank you both. Our next webinar is next Tuesday, and it's called Diaspora and Internationalization in Higher Education. What it is a presentation of a special issue of a journal, the British Journal Sociology of Education, which is involves Terry Kim, who was mentioned in the webinar, Paul Morris from UCL, and Professor Fazil Rizvi from Melbourne, and Annette Bamberger, who's in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Hebrew University. And they'll be presenting some of the ideas and the arguments which are coming forward in this very interesting special journal issue on diasporic activity, faculty, and internationalization. Mobility of people, always an important theme of research in international education and in the ways in which our different systems are connected. And it's our fond hope that the world will return to more normal travel, and we'll be able to engage more quickly and easily in each other's countries. But it's been very good that we've been able to do so online during the pandemic. And today has been an excellent illustration of the importance of international connections and bonds. I thank all of you who are in this webinar for that reason. And let's continue the conversation, even if the world returns to something closer to normal. We'll continue to run a webinar series of some kind, I think, even if the pandemic disappears tomorrow. It's been a very successful innovation for us, and to engage with you all has been very beneficial. Thank you all, and we'll see you on Tuesday, I hope, as the conversation about mobility continues. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.